Senhoras e senhores, boa noite.
Ladies and gentlemen, good
Mobilizar a sociedade e autoridades para a construção de cidades eficientes e que ofereçam a seus cidadãos transporte sustentável e igualitário é o objetivo do Fórum Cidades, Bicicletas e o Futuro da Mobilidade, idealizado por Byrne, ex-vocalista e guitarrista do Talking Heads. Em sua primeira edição, o encontro conta com a organização do Instituto Parada Vital e do ITDP, Instituto de Políticas para o Transporte e o Desenvolvimento, e a co-realização da editora Amaryllis e do SESC, Serviço Social do Comércio. Eduardo Alcântara Vasconcelos, especialista em planejamento urbano e coordenador do projeto Observatório da Mobilidade Cidadã da Associação Nacional de Transportes Públicos, Arthur Alcorta, cicloativista, e Marcelo Branco, secretário de Transportes da Prefeitura de São Paulo, se reúnem para o debate junto a David Byrne, mediado por Paulina Chamou, apresentadora e coordenadora de Meio Ambiente e Cidadania da Rádio Eldorado e da Rádio Estadão ESPN. Durante o fórum, os convidados discutirão sobre como as cidades do mundo seriam se reduzisse sua dependência do automóvel, promovessem sistemas eficazes de transporte coletivo e aumentassem o uso de bicicletas e outros meios de transporte sustentáveis e não poluentes. O Brasil é o primeiro país a sediar esse fórum, que passará por mais 7 cidades da América Latina: Buenos Aires, Santiago, Lima, Quito, Bogotá, Cidade do México e Guadalajara. Gostaríamos agora de mencionar a presença das seguintes autoridades: Senhor Eduardo Jorge, secretário do Verde e do Meio Ambiente. Senhora Renata Falzoni, apresentadora e ativista do transporte de bicicletas.
Activist of bicycle use here in São Paulo, and Tom Zé,
e compositor.
Singer and composer.
Dando continuidade à cerimônia, convidamos ao palco para fazer uso da palavra o professor Danilo Santos de Miranda, diretor regional do SESC São Paulo.
Regional Director of SESC in São Paulo.
Boa noite a todos.
Good evening to all of you. Welcome to our beloved SESC Pinheiros. I'm so glad to have you here, you lovers of bicycles, people wanting a better life for this city. Beloved Secretary Mario Jorge and the whole authorities here with us, I'm so glad to have you here. Naturally, we'll have the opportunity to hear a more comprehensive debate. That's why I won't take that long to present this. But I'd like to highlight our commitment and our desire to transform and improve and make people's lives easier in this city and in the whole country. So that's why we here at SESC are very honored to have you here. This is an entity that is always engaging in different projects with different events in terms of culture, citizenship, leisure, sports, and discussion on the most varied events. So, of course, we are here to discuss our better life for all of us. So, thank you for being here, and thank you for your efforts to attend this meeting and the people involved in the organization. Trying to understand what's the desire behind the human knowledge, we have traced several roadmaps in the cities, paths that maybe they must put us to think about our constructions. For example, where's the yellow house that was my reference point, my landmark, that turned to right? Where's the small park that was here when I was a child, where we saw grandfather and grandson playing together? So these memories are about imaginary space, and I recognize myself as a human text that is reading the whole time, this city context is sometimes confused by the rapid changes. The city as a place where we move, where we live, where we work is reconstructing itself all the time. But when the image starts to tear down and maybe creating bad relationships among the community, so we start to reflect and analyze what is going on here. This is created about our daily rituals, and with this, with a different perspective, different point of view, we can notice the ruins that are still in our memories. Doing this, we are trying to balance the effects that are making our public life harder and that is making cities turning something difficult. So this city, São Paulo, is 300 years making this transformation, and we are now 11 million people here and maybe 7 million cars. We need to retain this with an efficient policy of transportation that should be materialized, integrating bike paths with public transportation and encouraging cultural practices, encouraging respect for all as pedestrian or biker or drivers, so respecting all these criteria and all of these items, we believe in SESC São Paulo that restore this city rhythm, maybe creating different obstacles will be our challenge for the future, and maybe follow a different path full of culture and full of new adventures. So we are not happy with this voracity of the city, and that's why we're trying to recover abandoned places in this metropolis, giving them a cultural vocation as the ones that we have had for sports in SESC Pompeia and SESC Belonzinho. So in this process, the permanent engagement with improving quality of life, health and welfare of people is a mandatory action, and we need to understand what is going on in the Club of Pedal that was developed here in SESC Pinheiros, and also the running series of SESC Pinheiros. We believe that these paths are constructed step by step and are depending on the collectivity of this city. The social measures that are to be taken in this city space among education and cultural and some other different actions such as the theater street festival. We opted also for different paths such as the one proposed by the engineer Saturnino, who in 35,000 kilometers he has created a different memories and different path, maybe creating what's the patrimony of this bicycle use. Mountains, paths, roads and different culture settings were depicted in this work. Having access to all this culture and these several spaces of sociability are important, and we must support them with the humanistic conception of citizenship. These are the aspects we have in mind and that are linked with the environmental challenge we have today in this contemporary society. The analysis of society practices in this context is, I believe, are leading us to create a social practice that be supported on, or that be based on sustainability. SESC São Paulo believes that with this forum we will create new developments in different cities in Latin America, and we will contribute to create new ways to achieve this efficient movement. So we have here the opportunity to reflect about the paths of thought, and as Anna Haren has said, maybe define a new and forgotten sense to human knowledge, that is the coexistence in its very plurality. So thank you very much. request photographers to respect 5 first minutes of the forum to capture your images, avoiding flashes. So we will start our forum, cities, bicycles, and future of mobility. So we have Paulina Chamorro, who is presenter and coordinator of environment and citizenship of Radio El Dorado and Radio Estadão ESPN. Alright, can you hear me? Alright, good evening to all of you. Thank you very much for being here. We have a very illustrative presences here. We have several people, and we will talk about citizenship and collective space, how to use these two things in such a problematic city as São Paulo. This forum was created by David Byrne, musician, composer, musical producer, and do I need to present him, to introduce him? And he's also launching his book. So we will receive David Byrne. Please be welcome.
Welcome. Seguindo, vamos compor a mesa.
Then, before introducing our David Byrne, we will receive Arturo Alcorta, who is using bike as a transportation means like for more than 40 years, and is also working for Estado de São Paulo and several magazines. So we will have a funny time here. We will have Marcelo Blanco, who is the president, the CEO of CET, the traffic engineering company in São Paulo. He will be here in our forum. Welcome, Marcelo. And, well, as last but not least, we will have in this first forum in South America, we have Eduardo Vasconcelos. He's civil engineer with a doctorate in public policies in urban transportation, and he is part of ANTP here in São Paulo. Well, thank you very much. Let's start our talks. I have only a message for you. You can ask questions. You just raise your hands, and our fellows will go where you are, and we'll write down this question, and the questions will be selected. And David, he wants to have a very well-balanced debate that everybody is participating and giving input to this conversation. So thank you very much for being here, and we expect a nice debate and maybe open minds to understand how our city works and maybe get a nice experience. So please, David, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Does everybody need these headphones, or it works? If you don't have them, I think they have them outside. There's a man that it's working.
Yes.
Okay. Here's a picture. Here's a photo I took outside from a plane. I think it's from maybe Dallas or Houston, Texas, or someplace in North America. It's a typical North American suburbs. In North America, the middle class lives in the suburbs, and it's more or less unsustainable. You can't get anywhere without a car. You never see anyone else because you are only in your car and then home, and so it's a very isolated and unsustainable existence. So I started asking myself, how did we get there? How do we get to that situation? This is a city It exists in Australia. It's made by termites. Termites, they're a small insect. Yes. These are quite tall, maybe 2 meters. They are angled so that the sun does not hit the flat side. The sun hits the narrow side. They have air vents on the top, and they draw air in the bottom. So inside, where their children are growing, they maintain a constant temperature without the use of air conditioning or fossil fuels. We have not learned to do this yet. But the termites have been around longer than us, so we have some time. This looks similar. This is downtown Los Angeles. This is a drawing by an artist named Hugh Ferris. In the 1920s, he did a lot of drawings of drawings of great buildings that were going to be built, and he also did buildings of an imaginary city of the future. So he was one of the first to put the idea visually into people's heads what the city of the future could look like. There are beautiful drawings, really amazing, and you can see that they look also like the termite mounds, but instead of space in between, there are highways in between. The people are, well, it looks a little bit like Sao Paulo, but the people never come in contact with one another. That's another of his drawings. Very, very wide highways and very tall buildings, and no one on the street. This is a city of the future imagined by a famous architect, Frank Lloyd Wright. He was a great architect, but thank God he didn't become an urban planner. He imagined that we would live in isolated towers in the farmland. There would be some roads connecting it, but as you can see, we would never come in contact with one another. At least not by accident. The good part about his future is that we would have personal flying saucers. This is another proposal from another great architect and engineer, a man named Buckminster Fuller. Yes, and maybe. He's talking to me. This is a rendering by Buckminster Fuller, and it shows his proposal for Harlem, a neighborhood in New York. And he proposed that the residents move into giant cooling towers. And this never got built, thank God. Harlem as a neighborhood still exists, and now it is experiencing a revival. It's a nice place to live, and it's doing better every year. But there are no cooling towers for people to live in. This is the most famous and maybe the most influential of these proposals that were done in the early part of the 20th century. This is it was called the Radiant City, and it was proposed by the architect Corbusier. And similar to the others, he imagined that everyone would live in tall towers, and they would be separated by highways and large areas of grass. And he was quoted as saying, "We must kill the streets." the streets for him and many others at that period were just too chaotic. They didn't like this kind of chaos. You couldn't control it. There was no order there. There were too many accidents and random things happening. So it might be better to eliminate that kind of life that happens on the street. And so they proposed these kinds of things. And it was a very influential idea. This is a proposal that was done by General Motors. This is from the 1939 World's Fair, and in their exhibit that they made at the World's Fair, the public would ride on this. It was a kind of people mover, and they would see a giant model of the city of the future. And the city of the future, of course, had many, many lanes for cars, and again, not much possibility for human interaction. But it was very, very good for cars. Of course, General Motors made cars, and so this was not so much of a surprise. General Motors was also the biggest company in the whole world. And so when they made a proposal like this kind of propaganda, it was very, very influential. People took it to heart and thought, yes, that's what our city should be like. And, of course, it became true. This is downtown Los Angeles. This is downtown New Orleans. We're used to seeing other images from New Orleans besides the Katrina flooding. But in many North American cities and other cities around the world, the cities are cut by these giant highways. This is downtown Austin, Texas. I ride my bicycle around and explore the cities, and then I discover that I get to something like this and there's nowhere to go, so I have to turn around and go back. This is downtown Houston, Texas at 11 o'clock in the morning on a weekday, a work day. There are maybe 4 people on the street, and I looked around the corner. There was some more people around the corner, and those were the smokers. In a lot of North American cities, lots of space in the city is not only given to the car for highways, but for parking. If everyone has to drive into the city to work or to live or something like this, they need to put their cars somewhere. So lots of space is given to the car, and this is essentially dead space in a city. Maybe in the farmland this is okay, but in the middle of a city this is really dead space, and nothing happens there. There's no interaction, there's no shops, there's no buying and selling, there's no business, there's no music, and, well, it seems a bit of a waste to have that in the middle of an urban center. I think as a result of those policies, some of those areas, because they're so dead, they eventually die. This is a shopping mall that there's a website called deadmalls.com, and it is nothing but pictures of empty shopping malls. This is not real. So I ride my bicycle around, and I was riding in Newcastle, a town in the north of England, and I was riding along the river. It was very nice, and then I found myself on a kind of highway, and there was no people there, but I saw this sign that says, "Anything you say may be taken down and used as evidence." Of course, there was no one there to hear anything I said. But it told me that there was a kind of antagonism between the powers that control the city and the people who live in the city. It seemed like the people who run the city don't trust the people who live in the city. They need to be watching over them and watching out for what they say. This is another sign in England that says that we should be safe because we're being watched by closed-circuit television cameras. This looks like it's from the George Orwell 1984, but it's not. It's real. It's kind of a beautiful poster in a surreal way, but it's also very creepy. I think this kind of antagonistic attitude also goes. It has a negative effect on cities. This is downtown Cleveland, Ohio, where, well, it's not just for that reason. They also had a steel industry that failed, but much of the city is boarded up. So it doesn't have to be that way. There's physically, strangely enough, there's not that much of a difference between that picture of Cleveland, Ohio, with the boarded up buildings, and this image of a nice plaza in an Italian town. The difference is actually not that great. You could turn that street in Cleveland into something like that, and it's not so far. Oh, this is... I'm riding in this small Italian town on my bicycle and holding a camera at the same time. And it's not a big town like Sao Paulo. It's a small town. The cars are not forbidden, but the streets are very narrow. It's not it's difficult to drive a car in that town. It's not very convenient. So people only come in if they make deliveries or if they have to bring something or buy something. Most of the people in the town, I almost got hit by a bird, but most of the people use bicycles, young people, old people, grandmothers, and the other people walk around. Some places don't have much life on the streets at all. Los Angeles is a place where, typical North American city, where the streets are empty a lot of the time except for traffic. They discovered that if you made an artificial street, people really liked it. This is a shopping mall in Los Angeles, and they made it look like a street in a different city. And people can walk on the street, and it's very, very popular. This is Sao Paulo. It's not... because of the... I'm going to be very positive about Sao Paulo. Because of the density of the city, there's a lot of possibilities. There's a lot of possibility. Obviously, you see people everywhere, but there's a lot of possibility for these kind of changes and these kind of developments to happen that are more difficult in a city like Los Angeles. Yeah, I went riding around. I rode down to Praça da Sé, and there's a lot of life on the streets. And this is, all right, it's maybe a little dirty and run down, but it's actually a very beautiful area. And I think, I could imagine that in not so many years, this will be a very desirable area to live in, because there's a lot of life there. This is just another picture of the same area. This is, close to here, right? Madalena. Another area with smaller streets and a lot of people walking on the streets. That's very great area. This is Mexico City. They closed some of the streets and people ride around. This is Curitiba, where maybe you know all this, that many years ago the mayor initiated a high-speed bus program to ease congestion. It was cheaper than making trains, and it worked very well, and it's become a model in other parts of the world. That's the way it works on the highway. The high-speed buses get their own lanes. And this is imaginary proposal for Times Square in New York. I don't know if this will ever happen, but it looks very nice. But the cities can be transformed in all sorts of ways. This is kind of the Afro-Hege group in the favela. You probably all know about this as well. So a city can be transformed by culture, or this is, I think they were Dutch artists who began a series of paintings in some of the favelas, and just the art and the painting transformed the way people felt about the places they lived in. Okay. I ride around. I find it's a great way to discover a city. This is Utrecht in Holland, and these are the whorehouses. And it's a beautiful area. These whorehouses are floating on the water. They're like on barges. And it's very nice. They advise you to hold on to your child's hand. I was riding on my bicycle and I saw this band playing on the street in New York. They're very young and they're not very good. So I realized that as more people ride bicycles, like cars, they need a place to park. This is bicycle parking in China. It's pretty impressive, huh? This is bicycle parking in Amsterdam. Somehow people can find their bicycle in there and get it out again. This is bicycle parking in New Zealand, in New York, in Tokyo, where they make a little building, and for free you can put your bike in there, and no one even locks their bicycles up. And many cities, as maybe you have heard, are doing a bicycle share program, partly to ease congestion, partly for other reasons. And this is one of the first ones. This is the bicycle share program in Paris. It's also been done in Montreal, in Minneapolis, in Washington, D.C., in London, probably other cities I don't know about yet. I've tried it in a few cities, and it works great. If you don't ride a long distance every day, it's free. If you just are making trips that are like half an hour, like going to work, going to get groceries, going to meet a friend that's not too far away, it works really well. Some of those cities have had to build bicycle lanes so that the citizens who use these bike share things are a little bit safer. This is one in San Francisco. This is the one in New York, where they place the cars. The cars that park act as a kind of buffer, a protective zone between the bicycle lane and the street. And interestingly enough, as more people ride the bicycles, there are fewer accidents. So the more people that ride, the safer it gets. You'd think maybe it would be the other way, that more people would get killed because the cars would get aggressive and drive into them, as has happened before. But it works the other way. It's good news. Okay, I'm going to skip that. This is a kind of tax credit thing. Some cities are building parks over their highways, which means that the highway is no longer the same kind of dividing thing. That doesn't kind of split the city and divide the city the way it does in many places. And here's someone has used Photoshop to imagine what a street in Los Angeles looks like if it's made narrower. It looks more inviting. There's more shade. You have more possibility to cross the street and more incentive to see what's on the other side. And kind of lastly, sometimes I tell people that I ride a bicycle to work. I also ride to visit friends, to go out in the evening. And then they say, yes, that's okay, but I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. So I found some examples. This is the man who runs Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, a luxury brand conglomerate. He runs the New York branch, and he rides to work on a bicycle. This is President Obama. He needs to get maybe a more stylish bicycle. Here's Frank Sinatra and Sidney Poitier. Humphrey Bogart on a bicycle. It's not from a movie. I don't think he rode a bicycle in a movie. Here is Tennessee Williams on a bicycle. He looks very happy. I don't think I've ever seen him this happy. Here is Brian Jones, the former Rolling Stone. And last of all, there's Brigitte Bardot. And if we see more women on bicycles, the men, of course, will follow. That's it for me.
Muito obrigada ao David
Yeah, well,
Byrne.
thank you, David. So nice to have this trip together with you and your images. Most of these experiences are in the book being launched today, and today we saw a little bit of this experience. So I'll take the time to ask you a question. Are you hearing me? Right.
Quais são as outras cidades
What are these other cities that the forum will be in Latin America?
I'm doing quite a few cities, doing the same format, different people. Tomorrow I fly to Buenos Aires, volcano permitting, and then to Santiago and Quito, Lima, Bogotá, Mexico, Guadalajara.
Muitas. Lembrando, okay, sorry.
Go ahead.
Latin America is more open to these changes and these innovations than North America, I think, at the moment.
E as prefeituras,
and what about the city halls? Do you feel that they are ready maybe to get this debate on the table?
You have to ask them. They're
okay. Muito bem, só lembrando mais uma vez.
Well, very good. So, if you want to ask a question for our panelists, just raise your hand, and our fellows on the sides, they will write down the question, and at the end, we will have these questions and answers, right? So, is everything okay for your presentation, Arturo? All right, so let's give the floor to Arturo Alcorta.
Ok. Eu vou sentar no lugar do
Well,
David
I'll
Byrne.
take David Byrne's place.
Boa noite a todos.
All right, so good evening to all of you. My name is Arturo Alcorta. It's a huge pleasure to be here, being part of the bicycle solution for this city, pedestrians and handicapped people. I'm so glad to have this theater full of people engaged in this project.
Primeiro quero. Ups.
Wow, what was that?
Você mudou de cabelo.
You changed your hairstyle, I saw that.
Eu quero agradecer ao David
Well,
Byrne
thanks,
pela
David,
organização,
for
mais
this
pelo teatro
initiative,
cheio.
and thanks for being here. It's so important to have people like you on a bicycle. I don't know if you know that Paul McCartney was here riding a bike here. He had a bike and he went just bicycling. So, and I also want to say welcome to São Paulo, David. Well, New York. I was in '84 in New York, and I just went there last month, and I was very impressed by the changes the city has undergone. I was surprised. I was following what has going on with the bicycles in New York, and this is the last map. Just a problem. Just a minute, we have a technical problem here on your presentation. I was trying to find New York on that red slide. Is it working now? Well, I can't sing, but I can try it if you want, just to to kill time.
Isso vai ser tirado do seu tempo.
That is part of your time. Your time is running, Arturo.
Vai firme. Quando eu trabalhava na Rádio Eldorado, eles ficavam me cobrando o tempo.
When I was working with you at the radio station, he used to say the same thing. All right.
É uma incompatibilidade de máquinas.
This is what we call incompatibility of machines. This is a problem with Mac and PC and all of that. Oh, well, let me talk about New York, just to fill up my time. So, in fact, I'm following what's going on in New York for a while. That's part of my job. And actually, they had an amazing development. Giuliani, if I'm not wrong, a lot of years ago, they were having a problem with the quicksilvers, with the delivery being performed in bicycles in New York, and he tried to prohibit bicycles in New York, in a city with more than 5 million people, so that was impossible. So then, after a while, they decided to create new opportunities for New York, and now bicycles are welcome there. New York is in a process. This is not working. All right. So this is New York is undergoing a process of humanization, and this is incredible. And I returned here, São Paulo, and I was so disappointed with the lack of capacity we have here in Brazil to transform our lives, especially here in São Paulo, into a better life. I was so disappointed and so afraid of the future. That was the worst experience I ever had, I guess. I saw Paris in a short time. I was in Paris. I was in Amsterdam, Barcelona, and New York, and Utrecht. So our capacity to transform this city into a better thing, I believe, is something that it's really a concern for us. So what's going on with us here? I believe we lost, at some point in the time, we lost what's this about mobility, what mobility means. I believe we lost that concept sometime. We will understand mobility if we can understand again what a city means. And unfortunately, Paulistians, São Paulo dwellers, they don't know what's mobility about. We have one of the richest cities in the world in terms of architecture and social tribes and groups, ethnicities, differences, and this is not working. Long time without working. So how can we create a city? Can I have some water, please? Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Antes de falar de mobilidade,
So
a gente
before
tem que se perguntar como é que se
talking
constrói uma
about
cidade.
mobility, we should first understand how to create
Porque
a
a
city.
cidade tem que ser construída.
Cities
A
should
cidade
be
surgiu
created
por causa da união das
because
pessoas.
people want to be at the same place.
Para viver
They
mais
want to be
fácil.
united to get their
Para
lives
sobreviver.
easier in order to
E
survive.
desta união,
And from this
começou a se
union,
resolver uma série de problemas de
a
mobilidade.
serious
Os problemas que a gente
problems
tem em São Paulo
in terms
não
of
são
mobility
novos.
start to be
Se vocês não
resolved.
sabem,
The
rodízio
problems we
foi
have
feito
here
pela
are
primeira
not
vez
new.
na Roma
This
Antiga.
restriction of vehicles in the streets, depending on the plate,
Tá?
started
Então,
in
não tem
Rome,
novidade
is not
nenhuma.
new.
Tá? Qual é a questão?
So
A
what's
gente
the thing
perdeu
here?
a
What's the
noção
point? I
de como
believe
construir
we
uma
don't
cidade,
know how to
como a gente
build a
pensava
city,
futuramente.
how to
Eric
think
Ferreira,
in the city's future.
que é um professor,
Eric Ferreira,
doutor,
who's a
professor de faculdade,
professor
ele diz,
at the university,
ele tirou de alguém,
he
e
said
nós nos acostumamos
that
com
we
o
are
ruim,
used to the bad things.
infelizmente. Então, o que
Unfortunately,
acontece hoje em
that's
dia?
true.
A gente não consegue
Today,
mais pensar
we
com inteligência
can't
a cidade.
be smart or think smart
A gente não
in
consegue
a city.
mais pensar com
We
união,
can't think in something united,
com estrutura.
something with structure.
Conseguiu? É simplesmente inacreditável.
And this is just
David falou
unbelievable.
sobre o exemplo
David
de
has
Curitiba.
mentioned Curitiba example.
Simplesmente,
Wow, this is it.
muito obrigado.
Thank you.
Então vamos lá, tá? Só um segundinho, já entro no ritmo da
Okay,
palestra.
just
A gente
let
não
me get the
consegue,
right
é
slide. Alright,
inacreditável
so
que tendo uma
it's
cidade como
unbelievable that
Curitiba,
having
que
a
tem
city
uma
as
série de
Curitiba
respostas
that
do mundo inteiro,
provide
a gente não
answer for the
consegue
whole
pegar os
world on
próprios
transportation,
exemplos,
we can't see that
os
here
exemplos bons
in this
e
country.
ruins,
We can't
e
just
transformar
take the good
isso
examples and
numa
maybe
cidade
translate
melhor pra
them
gente.
into a better
Vamos
city
passar
for
bem.
us.
Peraí. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Let's see, where am I?
Não. Peraí, só um segundo. Tá? Nova York, esse era o mapa que eu
That
estava
was
dizendo,
the map
tá?
I
Eu vou
was
passar
telling you
rapidíssimo
about,
nas fotos.
the New York
Esse
map.
mapa aqui, se vocês
This
pegassem
map,
esse mapa de 7,
If you
8
get this
anos
map
atrás, vissem
7
a
or
quantidade
8
de
years
rotas
ago,
que tinha.
you'll see a lot of roads, a lot of paths, lanes for bikes, for bicycles. And today it's very
Ruas
different.
bem calçadas,
Streets,
largas,
very
bem tratadas,
well
uma quantidade
adapted
absurda de
streets
gente.
with a lot
Eles
of
são
people
normais como
all the
gente,
time.
param no meio
They
da
are
faixa
normal
de
like
pedestre,
us.
tem
They
problemas.
stop for pedestrians,
Essa
yes, of course.
bicicleta
And
pedal
well,
aqui
this is
discutiu
a
com aquele
nice
táxi que eles
bike.
saíram no táxi,
They discussed,
tá? Mas
they
a
were
cidade
arguing with
tá
the
muito
taxi
mais
driver. Well,
resolvida.
but anyways,
O
they
pai
are
dessa
doing
criança
very fine.
simplesmente largou o carrinho no meio da rua, não
The
estava
father of
preocupado.
this
Como qualquer
baby
cidade grande
just
do mundo,
disappeared. It's like this, all the things that
existe
happen in
uma
a big
quantidade de
city.
roubo absurdo de
We have a
bicicleta,
lot
né?
of
Você vê bicicleta parada em todo
robbery, a
lugar,
lot of thieves,
tá? Eles estão aprendendo com os europeus.
and they are learning with
que é uma
Europeans
bicicleta,
what's a
diferente da
bike
mountain bike
that's
normal,
different
tendo
from a
problema
mountain
com as
bike.
bicicletas
They're
elétricas.
having problems with electric
Ah,
bicycles.
A gente fez uma piada, é o seguinte,
We were
você compra
joking
uma
about
bicicleta
that. If you
dessas
get
aqui,
a
você
bike
ganha de
like
presente
this
dois
one,
chineses.
you
Um pra
get two
levar
Chinese for
a
free.
mercadoria e outro
One
pra
to
cuidar da
get the
bicicleta, porque eu nunca
goods
vi
and the
tanto
other
chinês
one
com
to take
bicicleta
care of the
quanto lá,
bike. So
tá? A cidade
Chinese
está
people, they
inteirinha
love to
marcada
ride
com essas
bicycles in New York.
ciclofaixas,
So the city, the
muita
whole
criança
city
na
is
rua,
with
o
these
pai com
bike lanes,
criança andando sem
bicycle lanes, a lot of people
Eu tava perguntando pro
walking
David
down
lá
the
dentro,
streets
como é que eles
with no,
aguentam um
no
metrô
fear.
tão sujo,
And I was talking, I was
tá?
asking
Metrô
David,
imundo, funciona
and
direito,
how do you
mas
manage to
literalmente
tolerate this
imundo.
subway that's a little bit
Você tem as
dirt?
pontes ligando
And
Brooklyn,
that's
por
like
exemplo,
that.
com
You have the
Manhattan,
Brooklyn Tower,
cheio de gente, e daí
full
você
of
tem
people,
o que ele tava
crowded,
falando,
and David
que são justamente
say
essas
that
ruas que foram
we have
redimensionadas
several
pelas pessoas. Eu
streets that
recomendo
were
seriamente que
redimensioned
todos vocês
to
vejam um vídeo
have people on
Ruas
them.
Sustentáveis
I
de Nova
strongly
York,
recommend to
do
see a
Sérgio
video
Abranches,
so
que
from
mostra
Sergio
o
Abranches,
início desse
and
processo,
it shows
tá? A
how
intenção
this
é
process
trazer
started.
quanto mais gente para as ruas,
As many people,
e Nova York tá lotada,
many
por
people
qualquer
in the streets,
David,
the more the better,
você
as you
tava
can see.
falando. Isso é fantástico.
So this is
Isso aqui é uma
fantastic.
rua, as
This is a
pessoas estão
street,
sentadas no meio da
and
rua.
people are in the
Isso
middle of
também
it.
é uma
So
rua,
this is
não é
another
almoço,
street at lunchtime.
tá? Tem vida nas
There's
ruas.
plenty of life here.
Isso daqui é uma coisa muito bacana.
Here's something very interesting.
Elevado que tinha trem que eles
This
estavam
is
recuperando. Como é que chama?
elevated road. I don't know how's the name of that, David. Do you know that? How's the name of this place?
It's called the High Line. It was a former
High Line.
railroad that delivered food.
Era trilho que levava comida. Mas abandonaram e virou um parque.
Fantástico, você vê.
So that's fantastic.
Está sendo aproveitado. Isso é uma ciclovia.
This is a bicycle lane.
Tá, com restaurante, com
with
gente andando,
restaurants and people around.
Isso é Harlem.
This is Harlem.
Essa imagem, tá?
Perfect picture of that. City full of taxis, pedestrians in the middle of it. And this guy is just in the middle of an avenue in a bench. And he's with clean air, and that's fantastic. The same thing happens here in São Paulo. São Paulo is not doing like that, but if we leave São Paulo and we go to other cities nearby, they are having a nice air quality over there.
Como é que se consegue? Minha cara Laura
Cineviva, one of the main thinkers here in São Paulo, she said that cities are only possible when we have legitimacy. This means to think in all, not only in one single sector. We should think not only about bikes, but also about cars. We should think how to interact or how to integrate everything. Pedestrians, cars, motorbikes, everything. And we should also think in everybody. And we should create a city trying to understand what was the city yesterday and trying to respect their spirit, seeing what they need today and trying to understand what's the future for the city. A future may be with results that be perennial, that be long-lasting. So the city is in constant movement, and the result should be a result that 50 years from now your grandsons will tell you, wow, this is fantastic, thank you very much. So that's the problem in São Paulo. In São Paulo, we don't have projects. We have an area such as this one I'm depicting here. It's called Parque do Povo. If you research a little bit about this park, you'll see that we have some urban space use that was not that very good. But this red area you're seeing here, the square in red, is a public area that the congressmen, they approved last days. They approved the selling of these. They have a theater, a school, library, many health services here, and the society was totally silent. I'm sorry, but I can't stand with this. People are quiet about these kind of atrocities. This is about mobility, because this area is totally crowded. If I discuss with Marcelo the problems of this area, the problems are so huge. Enormous. So the society is silent. They don't say a word about these kind of atrocities. So with that, another things come to the discussion. Good or not, we don't know, but we should discuss them. Few people talk about the single rail or the monorail, this steel suspended bridge, the new avenues we should have here, the problems with the bicycle lane, what are the advantages, what are the disadvantages. The project of Celso Garcia, when we spent a lot of money in order to create this avenue, Celso Garcia Avenue, and no maintenance on that. The same thing with water ways, clean water, metropolitan region that is so isolated, integration park that has been created but was not finished so far, and society is not giving a damn about that. So it's amazing. The high-speed train, they say that they are having trouble with that. Even the word bala, that means bullet. 5 minutes, Arturo, please. So, in fact, there's a lot of there's a lack of discussion here, and the information we have here to discuss these topics is information that is poor. It's not good quality information. So, the press today, they are making this information even poorer, and they are creating bad concepts in the people. And, well, even things such as what is in, what is out, what is elegant, what is fancy, are changing the way we see our values. So that's a problem. And here we come to this seminar. I know some other cities in Latin America, and I know what they are doing in terms of mobility in Chile, in Quito. I know what they're doing, and they are doing such a wonderful job there. It's so important to have people such as you, David, to be here, being engaged, and trying to encourage discussion. So the question is, what's the future of mobility? What do you want?
If you don't have the correct information about the development of a culture, about the effective participation, and especially citizenship. If you don't have this, we won't have mobility, urban mobility, citizenship. I criticize the sense of citizenship of the citizens of São Paulo because of how dirty the city is. It is unacceptable. And then I make an invitation to all of you. We could, I ask, how many people would come to a presentation by Malatesta? Who is Meli Malatesta? Well, Meli Malatesta is the one responsible, the final, for the cycleway projects here in São Paulo. If her work is not followed, if the work that is being developed at the Secretariat of Transportation, if what she does is not followed, this won't work. When Marcelo came, there was some people booed him. I work with all the powers. If you are not able to listen, what those responsible for the policies regarding bicycles are already say, if you're not ready to do good criticism, constructive criticism, we won't develop our future.
Obrigada, Arturo.
Thank you, Arturo.
Obrigada ao Arturo, exatamente.
Thank you, Arturo.
Ele, que é dos responsáveis, a gente viu aí pelo site.
He is one of the responsible ones for this website, Escola de Bicicleta. And let's see if now we can hear the secretary. My presentation had precisely 14 minutes. I apologize for having exceeded this. Let us go to the presentation from the Secretary of Transportation, Marcelo Branco, reminding that you may take part after the presentation, after Eduardo's presentation. We will read the questions. You may raise your hand, and people from the team will write down your question, though. We will make a choice of questions in order to have a balanced debate. So now let us see if everything goes out right. All right. It's the floor is yours, Mr. Secretary. Good evening to you all. I'd like to thank you for this invitation. I had prepared a presentation which was in the sense of showing how this bicycle lane is working, but I think what would be most relevant would be to have a conversation and we would like more to show concepts and ideas than to actually discuss the projects that are being developed currently. But I wanted to start with this sentence by Ian Gale, which I find which demonstrates what we want to discuss here, which is the capacity of people to, or of the designers, people who think the city, the capacity to think about the city, a city meant for people, which is most important. So, making a link with what Arturo said, I think the construction, the development of the cities, this is important. This lack of capacity, historical lack of capacity, demonstrated in the city of São Paulo. Today, if we want to have a city more meant for people than for vehicles, we need to reconstruct the city somehow. This lack of planning that there was before, the lack of understanding that the city belongs to the people, led to our current reality. This reconstruction, as far as I see, must be a comeback to this principle of people using the city, not the vehicles. It is a difficult task. It is because we actually have a transportation matrix, which is that of vehicles. We have today 55%, considering 55% of the public transportation, and 45% is 55% public transportation and 45% cars, which is an extravagance. This model, where you have a volume of vehicles, around 10 million trips, is a failed model throughout the world. The cities that chose individual transportation have reached a collapse point or are close to it, like the city of São Paulo. So I think that here we have an American management professor who has a sentence which fits here regarding our way to think the city. He says that he's an expert in strategic planning. He says that the first thing that he brings to the managers is that they should think what cannot be done in their organization. Let's say, so they have to overcome their paradigms, thinking about what cannot be done, because if you ask what can be done, many times the manager starts to think about the restrictions. So the question is, what cannot be done? But if it could be done, how would it change the future of your organization? So this is the question that we have to ask ourselves on a daily basis, the city of São Paulo. What is it that we cannot do, but in case we did, in case we managed to do, which would change the future of a city? And by asking this question on a daily basis, we have a structure which is SP Trans, and the ECT, which is a company whose culture was would consider taking into account mostly the individual transportation. This was a culture. This was created in the 1980s. Arturo was already conceiving the bicycle lanes, but CET was devised in a time where when people thought about creating a company to improve traffic flow. But then that is the culture of the company, and it is difficult to change the culture. So this is a challenge we have. What you, as a CT, which was created to handle traffic flow, that is what it was meant for. What do you think we could change, which may be impossible to do today, but perhaps could change the future of our city and the future of the city mobility? So within this mentality, it is that we managed
muito mais reforçada, que eu vou dizer. Na minha visão, é muito tímido, mas eu
But taking this into account, we have managed to make progress with leisure bicycle lane, which I think was an old aspiration in terms of sharing the streets. I think I must provide people the right to circulate in such a manner, for them to have such room. So if you imagine that it is not possible to do, and this is what we want to change, what do you think that is not possible to do, but in case we did, we would manage to make room for all those who have the right to circulate? This is the exercise we have practiced on a weekly basis. I think this leisure bicycle lane allows this interaction between drivers and cyclists. In spite of it being only on weekends, now we are opening it also for holidays. I think it already has this merit of generating the possibility of sharing the roads. And we are implementing it on the following week. The first bicycle route of the city, and we are choosing a whole neighborhood for that whole district. And I want to then widen it to other neighborhoods. But the breaking of these paradigms is very important. More than it is a matter of opening the roads for pedestrians. This effort we have made in terms of respecting the pedestrian lane, prioritizing people's life, even more important than mobility itself. And people say, well, if you increase the time of the red light, for example, wouldn't this create any slowness? Perhaps it can, but it is a choice. The city needs to make a choice for people and not for vehicles. Yes, it is a difficulty. We are reconstructing a historical way of thinking, but the first steps have to be made, and we have achieved this by means of convincing even the CET technicians. Today we have a more favorable environment to such discussions than a few years ago. So I kind of changed my presentation here. But it is important to show the bicycle route we are creating in this neighborhood here. And we really need to look for sharing. I discussed with Thiago a few times. I share with him this vision that the cycle lanes, we must make room for them. We must implement certain cycleways and cycle lanes, but I really believe in sharing, actually. I don't think the solution to the city of São Paulo would be to have segregated lanes everywhere and the city as a whole, but it would be more a matter of creating the possibility of people who want to be respected when they cycle. when we have currently an unequal relation, and whenever there is an unequal relation, we need to protect the weakest parts. And this is the message I would like to convey. And then I open this for questions as well.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. President of CET, and remember that you can ask questions to him if you want it. So, and then we will have Eduardo, and I believe you know by heart your presentation, so you don't need a computer. And something I like to highlight, a couple of years ago I made an interview with Enrique Peñalosa, a personal friend of David, I guess, and he has a quote that I believe is very important. He said that if all citizens are equal in face of the law, so a coach of 70 seats should have the space of 70 cars. He said that. So with that, I'd like to give the floor to Enrique. Eduardo. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. A nice and interesting topic. I was born in this city. I was a young kid in the 60s, and our life was playing ball and ride a bicycle. That was my life in Italy, this neighborhood. So I'm testifying, or I'm here witnessing these changes. I'm seeing my city maybe turn into something dehumanized. And it started in the 70s, I guess, when people, the first Paulistians, they got their cars and they started running over people and they were killing people. And I remember that a neighbor of mine, he was run over by a car, and that shocked me a lot when I was a kid. But anyways, I'm here to contribute a little bit, trying to remind some of the topics, technical topics that are important to fight against the myths we have in the city. Because if we can't overcome these myths and these false items, we can't create good solutions and real solutions. The idea is to create a moral embarrassment on the people that are defending these myths as something true. So let's fight them with loyalty and with the truth. So the first important point is that all discussions, I believe, well, all my colleagues have talked about that, but I believe that this idea of looking for efficiency and all of this, I believe that's a risk. Of course, the city is not efficient. It's a city with low levels of efficiency, but in the developing countries, the efficiency is something that is just another point. If we believe that efficiency is the most important thing, tomorrow we can close 1/3 of the bus lanes in São Paulo because they are not efficient in an economical point of view. Bike lanes, don't even talk about it, because what's the cost of doing that? If we are thinking in efficiency, no way, this is not going to happen. So I believe equality is something important. Equity, I believe, is what we need to talk about, not about efficiency. So our huge challenge here is to create an equality project with some degree of efficiency, of course. So to understand my numbers or my figures I have, it's important to remind you that mobility of people and cargo, they have two angles that should be analyzed in order to understand what's going on and see how we can change it. The first angle is the consumption angle, mobility consumes space. The cities in the wealthiest country in the world, the United States, we have Los Angeles, that they have 70% of their space that is devoted to cars. Even if they are running, if they are still, they have 70% of the space for cars. So depending on the mode you are using to commute, you use some spaces. Pedestrians, they consume 1 square meter. Motorcycles, they consume more or less 8 to 10 square meters. The same thing with people that is going on the couches in the buses. They have 1 square meter for them. And cars are 50 meters, square meters. And we have a different consumption of energy too. Who is in the bus is consuming just 1/10 of the energy consumed by a car. That's something clear in the literature. Regarding pollution, we see people talking that it's absurd a coach or a bus with 6 people on it. But the person who is criticizing is in his car and is creating more pollution and creating 8 times more space than the bus. So we have several things to understand here. We should understand these figures and try to fight these methods and defend our proposal. If we can fight these myths, I believe that they will be unsustainable and they will fall. So the only way they have to win is using the force. So the model we are proposing here has a lot of virtues. Many of them. So I used to compare a lot of data, a lot of slides. I can't show you, but anyways, all my data are coming from several databases, several sources of information. This is something really serious, and we have several databases of mobility in the developing countries with cities that more than 60,000 inhabitants. So this has been copied by several cities in Latin America, and they have a similar database, and you can consult that on the internet. So the numbers or the figures I'm talking here are all there. So if you compare São Paulo using this data set, what we call mobility metabolism is very interesting. What people is consuming, the amount of space, and the impact they are creating in the environment. The 3 more important impacts are car accidents. That's an important factor. The second factor is air pollution. In cities such as São Paulo, that's important. And traffic jams, congestions. So these 3 negative impacts are not the only ones, but they are the most common ones and are very clear for the discussion. So if we see maybe a given morning in São Paulo, a given day in São Paulo with the data of 080, average family with 2 cars, they have 4 people, a family of 4 people with 2 cars, and we have the low-income families that they have 4 people and no cars. At the end of the day, this middle-income family will have consumed maybe 10 to 12 times more space and resources than the poor income family. In a city such as São Paulo, that costed more or less $50 billion per year if we calculate that. So we have a lot of investment in this road system that is being used for a small part of our society that is using their cars. So this is like a privatization of public space that constitutes a certain degree of violence. That violence was based on a myth that were trying to say that creating roads and constructing roads is something democratic, but it's not. It's not democratic, and it's totally absurd. That's the first myth we should fight against. Well, pollution. Thank you.
Tanto o automóvel quanto a motocicleta.
Well, pollution, both the car and the motorbikes, they pollute a lot if we compare with the passengers it transports. When we talk about traffic jams, I know that figures are clear. The myth that São Paulo has 7 million cars, that's not real. That figure is not true. We have more or less 4 million cars maximum, maybe 3 million and a half. Of course, that's a huge number. But there are not 7 million cars here. It's impossible for them to exist. And I don't know who's interested in saying that, but anyways, I believe there was a misunderstanding on that. Maybe there are 7 million of vehicles, maybe, counting or summing up motorbikes or something like that. But I believe we have 5.5 million vehicles, but cars are 3.5 million. So that's why things are difficult to discuss, because numbers are not real. Figures are wrong. So this same family, mid-income, they have polluted a lot more than the low-income family, and they contributed to accidents. São Paulo, we have a lot of accidents, you know that. So we have a lot of inequity or imbalance in this space, public space, and that was constructed, and that's important to remind you guys, due to a project of human beings that were living before us in this city. So they had a different view of life and the city. So I believe it's a little bit naive thing. They saying that they didn't know what they were doing and they were naive too. That's wrong. They were the elite. They were the top level of management in the city, and we were influenced by the Americans and the Europeans, saying that cars meaning development and that brings jobs. So that's what the top class will say. That's what the Brazilians have been done during the last 70 years. So maybe our grandpa can be in that process. So that is not finished yet. That process is still alive. Top management is determining this thing. So this is not about willingness. This is about power. So these people are still ruling us. So I believe we should prepare for a debate, democratic debate, for the equality, for the balance between all of us, and fight against these myths. Let's kill these myths, and after that we will have a nice round table. For instance, people think that these 4 million cars are at the same time in the traffic jam in the city. When I ask these people, they say, well, 3.5 million, but only 15% of them are in the cities during the traffic jam or the congestion, freezing up the city. So that shows us that something that is not a novelty for you, that cars needs 50 square meters to road to make its way in a 50 kilometers per hour average speed. It's impossible. That's impossible to fit all of that in a given city. They couldn't do that in Los Angeles, and they are the superpower in the world. So they have a lot of land, they have a lot of space, a lot of room for cars, and they are champions in traffic jams, according to Texas University. So they are the champion, because they have a lot of traffic jams. So that myth that roads, or creating new roads, will abolish traffic jams, that's a myth. I have no idea how many minutes I have. All right, I have 5. All right. So we should remember that many characteristics of developing countries are important here. First of all, we have democracies that I'll say they are weak. Some of our Latin American countries, they have almost dictatorships. They have very weak democracies. Today, I believe we are having a stronger democracy, and I believe that this will continue in the near future, but given the disequality of our societies and the lack of education and the misunderstanding of politics processes, I'm talking about a huge ignorance here. That's not about intelligence or being smart. This is about knowing what's going on in this country. Our population, they don't know what's going on in politics terms, so they are easy to convince for a given perspective. So That
muito grande. As pessoas que
problem
hoje, por
is
exemplo,
big.
não nós que estamos aqui,
People,
temos
not you,
alguma
of course, not us, not people in the middle class, but people that they really need bicycles in Brazil. They don't have power. They can't fight the government. They can't propose things. So this process I'm talking about here, that started in the decade of 30s, it's still going on. So the last decades have been about power and top classes ruling out what's going on, and they have approved cars and motorbikes and policies, but not think about bicycles. So today we don't have any political group, a real political group. There's no political group here in Brazil that is supporting the project we are supporting here. No one. Nobody. So we are here to represent a huge network that is growing day after day, that is a little bit outside this political system, and we are the ones to change this. No politicians on this. Nobody is giving a damn about us. So no one is reducing taxes, for example, for us. They don't reduce taxes for buses. They reduce taxes for cars and for motorbikes, but not for buses. People, they use the buses. All the top management and all the top class here in Brazil, they are very deeply dominated by this ideology, this mindset of progress, and the new oil reserves here in Brazil. This is going to worse scenario. So, as I said, there is no political group that is available for us. So,
terminando,
just to wrap up,
quais são as propostas? A primeira proposta
what are the proposals? The first proposal that we should step for democracy, for citizenship. I like to remind what's going on here with pedestrians that cross the pedestrian crossing. They say thank you here. That's absurd. Why thank you? He's obligated to do that. So that's the most clear example of the lack of citizenship. He says, thank you, you are so nice, you stopped the Pratt crossing, and we are Brazilians and you're my brother, they say. Come on, that's absurd. And why are we laughing at? That's an absurd. So I was in the CET, I was part of the first groups trying to analyze the suburbs in this city, and were nice discussions, hot discussions, and we need to encourage citizenship when you're driving, showing people that are in the buses and they're in this public system. They say, I'm feeling bad because buses, they're creating a lot of air pollution, but they don't know that what is creating pollution is private cars. So they are dominated by this ideology, and we should work for citizenship, and that's not an easy task. It will be a hard path, and an environment such as this that took 100 years to take place. All these buildings, all these avenues, that won't change in 10 years, so it won't help working on that sales. We should maybe change the way we see the public space. My first proposal is that. So, okay, we should reduce speed in the avenues. That's a proposal I have.
A CT começou a fazer esse projeto.
CT has started this process. I was personally there to support that project. That's the right project. We should reduce the speed limits in all the avenues, not only in the avenues, but in the small streets in the neighborhoods. Neighborhoods have been are private now. Children can't play in the street today. So, of course, this huge city won't be the city I lived anymore when I was a child, but it could be better. Why not? We should create an European-like project. We should maybe reduce speed limits everywhere to 30 or 40 kilometers per hour. I believe that's what we have to do. With that, we can reorganize the traffic space and maybe put the pedestrian and the cyclist in the middle of it, and leave your children play in the street, that cars are not a threat anymore. So if we don't do that, it's too dangerous for bikers. So we should remove cars from the streets. Happily, the traffic jams, they have function in math that is exponential. It grows too fast. So if we remove 30% of the cars, definitely, for once and for all, we will reduce the traffic jams and we can get some room for buses, pedestrians, bicycles. So we should remove 30% of the space being held by cars and don't let them in again. I'm speaking a lot. I'm tired. Let's continue afterward.
O mais interessante que o Eduardo fez uma colinha aqui com apenas algumas linhas do que ele iria falar. Bom, rapidamente
only wrote a few lines about what he was going to speak. Well, we are delayed, as you may have noticed, but here we have 15 minutes, so let us finish at 9:20, and let's start with the questions. So I will start now with a question to Mr. David Byrne. Question.
In São Paulo,
the question from Danilo. In São Paulo, many activists bet on the sharing, the coexistence between car and bicycle in a harmonic way without separating them. Do you find this possible? Do you find it viable considering the difference in terms of weight and speed between one and another?
Specific what's going to work in this city. I'm not familiar enough with this city, but and I know that from riding around in different cities that sharing is possible. The drivers learn that there will be other kinds of vehicles on the road, and the cyclists also stop at red lights and this kind of thing. If there's a possibility of a protected lane, it's preferable because then even a child can ride on it. Even a child can go to school, and the parents aren't feeling that there's as much risk. But you can't possibly do that to every street in a whole city. You can do it you can make a grid, you can make a network, but the rest you have to share.
So I'll go on with another question. Another question to you from Andressa. Well, she says that in your book, Bicycle Diaries, you say that it seems like it won't take long for bicycle to be a viable reality in New York. Do you think you have already reached this stage that it is actually a viable means of transportation?
And in many other cities, but the ridership can go way up. I think in Copenhagen it's maybe almost 50%, and they expect it to go higher, so that half the people who live there go to work on a bicycle or something. And we might say, both me in New York and people in Brazil might say, oh yes, but that's the Danish people. The Danish people will do this, and we're not Danish people. We're Brazilians, or we're New Yorkers. We don't. But the Danish people had the same reaction. When certain changes were proposed, they said, oh no, we will never give up our cars. We're Danes. We love our cars. And we love our parking spaces. That's a kind of perverse love. But They said the same thing, and the changes were made very gradually, and then things had a momentum because they found that the street that became more friendly to pedestrians and for people sitting was actually better for business. The businesses did better. And so then the business on the other street says, well, we want the same thing. And so then it takes a momentum of its own. But I guess I was saying that it has a long way to go in New York. And yeah, we kind of use our national culture as an excuse for inertia, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Now it is a question to Secretary Marcelo Branco, a question from Marco Antonio. He says, when do we discuss the means to create room for people to use bicycles in a wider way, wouldn't we need to solve, first of all, the problems of basic mobility in terms of the bad condition of maintenance of sidewalks? What is the importance of sidewalks? Well, Marco Antonio, I think we cannot leave aside a project because we need to solve a so-and-so problem first. So I think the problem of the sidewalks is serious in São Paulo. I don't know, I haven't come to a conclusion on how to solve this because we have a complicated legislation. The obligation of taking care of the sidewalk is of the citizen, the city hall. So if the city hall makes an adequate sidewalk, clean, well maintained, but it may be inadequate for a wheelchair, for example, so their obligation is only to have a clean sidewalk. It is complicated because I think the city has to solve this. I don't know how this would be, but I think this change of behavior, towards sharing, has to do with many measures. When we talked about respecting the pedestrian, many people said, well, but I know a place where the pedestrian lane strip is erased. We have over 80,000 pedestrian strips. We are making another many. But it is not because in many places there is an inadequate strip that we will stop respecting the other ones which are already implemented. So this, when we think about what comes before, it may be somehow vague. But we cannot, do we need to solve the problem of the sidewalks? Yes, but we cannot leave other actions aside. Also, we first solve the problem of the sidewalks, and only then we work, we try to implement create room for bicycles. Otherwise, we'll go nowhere. We get nowhere. Arturo, would you like to comment on this? Well, this is my comment. There is an inversion of values. Yes, we are responsible for the sidewalks. The only way to solve this kind of thing, I don't know if he agrees, is simple. We need to change the federal law. The secretary and all those people who have power here in São Paulo, they come to a point where they have to obey a federal law. When I mentioned mínima testa, according to federal law, the maximum power belongs to those who do the technical signature. So the maximum power is of those who signed the project, approved the project. And the sidewalk is not is a responsibility of the municipality. The proposal is that the government should take the responsibility for the sidewalks of the main roads of the Brazilian cities.
Aqui na divisão de microfones também é coletivo. Vou seguir então.
Well, I'll move on. Another question to the secretary, and then I have another question to Arturo, another one to Eduardo. Mr. Secretary, the cycle lane for leisure could be used one day for daily transportation. I think we need to have specific projects for each thing. The leisure bicycle lane, I think this requires a deeper study because it's devised to be a leisure lane. It is not the best route for bicycles. We can use parts of it where we identify that there may be a transportation demand there. So I don't think it is only a matter of taking the leisure lane and transforming it. Oh, this same leisure lane will be used every day for bicycles. I think then we need a project for that purpose and not improvise. So this study is actually being carried out to see which parts could be used in a permanent manner, perhaps widen this. We need to have a specific project, which as far as I see is not so simple. So I'd like to make another remark, which is this thing of reducing the speed limit. This is essential. I'm glad that it was mentioned here. Yes, it is essential to reduce the speed of vehicles in the city of São Paulo. I have been very criticized because of this, and people say, no, it's a fine industry. In the whole world, when you reduce the speed limit in cities, the number of accidents decreases and the number of the death toll decreases as well. So it is mandatory to reduce the speed in cities. We had urban speeds here which are considered exceptional. We are reducing all those speeds. And in those neighborhoods, in this neighborhood, Brooklyn, where we are creating the cycle route, we'll already have a speed limit of 30 kilometers an hour. It is essential for people to use streets in another manner, which is not that of driving cars. Question to Mr. Arturo Corta. What do you think about the small participation of the population when it comes to discussing mobility in São Paulo? Public hearings. Actually, I find this terrible. I think we do not participate very much. On the other hand, I see we have a serious problem because there are people who participate but have an orthodox view. My concern with the human development of this country is in the sense that they want this to become a rivalry like that exists between the traditional soccer teams. It's becoming somehow bipolar, and there is an interest behind this. And many people are attending meetings with the principle saying that, oh, those people who are in the city hall, the secretary, the mayor, they are enemies, let's say. They say that what we need to learn is that there is a midfield, and no matter how bad the enemy may be, you need to talk with the enemy. You need to understand his reasons, and the only way to manage to change things is really by restructuring their thoughts. So what makes me glad regarding those years of work, and I have worked with Eduardo Vasconcelos, people would consider me crazy. Many of the good things that happened from ever since 1982 came from this Mother Teodoro house, which was the State of São Paulo project house. What has happened throughout these years is that recently there has been a movement, a pro-bicycle movement, which has grown strongly. There has been, people have matured. There has been a growing maturity. From people stop thinking that car is exclusively the enemy. I thank this guy with a beard, Thiago Benicchio. Thiago is one of the thinkers. I mentioned his name. And there are people, other people who have struggled in this sense. We need to find another way to fight. Please do not be bipolar. Things are not exclusively bad or exclusively good. Things are human. We are all humans. Well, now a question to Professor Eduardo Vasconcelos from André. He says, I haven't seen the city different in the past 30 years. It's only more crowded. What is the citizenship paradigm that we must change? Quite philosophical, the question. Actually, I am not a professor. I would even like to be one, but actually I'm not. When I say that the city has become different, yes, I agree. Well, the traffic jams started to grow in the 1960s. It's a long story, and they have only increased. Previously, there was a city which was somehow a more equal city previous to the car. When the car came, it became more unequal, more unfair, more different, and this became worse. I can't quantify this, but the maximum point of inequality perhaps was 10 years ago. Why do I establish this difference? There was not a general congestion in the sense of affecting the city as a whole. From the moment the traffic jams became general, then there was enormous inequality and inefficiency. Those are the two things which are most undesirable. I see this inequality. I see equity in traffic as an equal distribution of resources, which I mentioned. If the road system is of public use, if it was built using public money, the criteria of division, and we've been saying this for 30 years, many people took part in this debate. The traditional traffic engineering imported from the United States in a blind manner. Let's say there are 5 cars and a bus, then 5 cars have a priority. No. When I said, hey, but the bus has 30 people, and so the bus should be prioritized. But this is a North American traffic engineering, but it is a society that prioritizes the individual transportation, and you don't have any more pedestrians. No more pedestrians. So So equity would be equal distribution of space. The energy consumption, which I manage, space consumption, this would be balanced, and the generation of negative impact, the externalities, we need to understand who generated this impact and who will suffer from it. What happens today is that those who generate the impact are the richest, and those who suffer are the poorest, and this must be balanced. We need to balance this distribution between generation of negative impact and suffering because of negative impact. And this equation is clear in terms of sociology and political science, but in terms of translating this to put this into execution, yes, it is difficult. We are ending a long cycle of nearly 80 years of this project of capitalist modernization based on the creation of employments through the automobile industry, and this cycle is coming to an end. And in the past administration, they liberated motorcycles as well. The Brazilian city was motorized as the elite wanted, and we lost the first time of the match. Now we need to win the second time of the match, the second half of the match.
Eduardo, que é sociólogo.
Well, Eduardo, he's a sociologist.
Bom, eu vou fazer agora a última pergunta.
I'll ask the last question.
E eu, obviamente,
and of course, the question goes to you, David. The question comes from Durval, and I'd like to tell David, after maybe answering the question, if you can wrap up this forum, maybe draw some conclusions or some suggestions. The question is, if Copenhagen is 10 and Hong Kong is 0, what is the scale of São Paulo? What's the grade in the concept of biking?
Well, it depends on the streets, of course. Some of us just rode over here, and we were a large group, so it was a little bit unusual. But I realized that if you ride on some of the quieter streets, it's very nice. And if you know your way around the town, you can do it. But then if you have to get on one of the, at some point you have to get on a larger street, it's a big problem. It's not like Hong Kong. Hong Kong, maybe because it was, I don't know, it had an interesting, strange history. It was a British colony. It was really a financial district, a trade district, not for, it was not really a city that developed in a typical way. It developed to be a machine for, money exchange and mercantile exchange and merchant banking and all that kind of thing. So it doesn't have other kinds of infrastructure as well. It doesn't really have parks. It doesn't have plazas where people can sit. It doesn't have esplanades along the water. It doesn't have all the sorts of things that Sao Paulo has parks and places where people can gather, plazas, all these kind of things. It's not just about bicycles. You sense in a place like that the whole city is not for people. It's there for another purpose.
Muito bem. Terminamos agora o nosso fórum.
So we are finishing our forum.
Umas palavras finais para o nosso público, David.
Would you like to?
Sorry. Pois é, tá difícil aqui.
I'm supposed to sum up. I'm supposed to make a conclusion?
Yes, please. As palavras finais para o público, isso.
In the future, yes. No, there was, I heard this former mayor of Bogota talk once, and Enrique Peñalosa, and he and other people have said something very simple. They said, don't get stuck imagining what will happen next year or 5 years. Think of 100 years. Think of 200 years. That's how long it took to build the cathedrals. Think of what your city could be in 200 years. And start from that. Start and imagine, what could the life be for not your children, but their children and the children that they have? And how could the change happen? And then you start thinking, well, you think, imagine what it could be. Not a utopia. We're human beings. But then you start thinking in a slightly different way, and you realize that you're going towards something that is for your... anyway, it makes you think in a different way. You stop thinking that things are not possible when you think in a long term like that. When you think, what can we do next week, it seems impossible. But when you think 50, 100 years, maybe things are possible.
Muito bem. Estamos chegando ao fim, então vamos. Eu agradeço a participação de todo mundo, principalmente aos integrantes da mesa e ao David Byrne, idealizador, que vai levar esse debate agora para toda a América do Sul também.
Across the Americas, so very nice.
Encerrando o Fórum Cidade e Bicicletas e o Futuro da Mobilidade, agradecemos a senhora Paulina Chamorro, ao senhor David Byrne, ao senhor Eduardo Vasconcelos, ao senhor Arthur Alcorta e ao senhor Marcelo Branco pela oportunidade de e apresentações de suas vivências. Agradecemos também às autoridades, convidados e público aqui presente, que contribuíram para o sucesso deste evento. Desejamos a todos uma boa noite.
Good evening and good night.